I moved into that apartment last January. It was in a small town in Pennsylvania called Wilkes Barre. Quiet, but not completely dead. I had just gotten out of a bad relationship and wanted to start fresh somewhere new. A small, cheap apartment seemed like a good place to begin. The building was old. Paint was peeling off the walls, the metal stairs were rusty, and the air inside smelled like dust and damp wood. But the rent was only $650 a month, utilities included. I didn't care about the age of the place. I just needed somewhere to be alone for a while. The landlord, an older man named Mr. Doyle, seemed friendly. When I signed the lease, he mentioned that Unit 312, the one I was moving into, had been vacant for a while. People don't stay long in there, he said. When I asked why, he just smiled faintly and said, "Some tenants said they heard strange noises at night." I laughed it off. It sounded like one of those small-town ghost stories landlords tell to mess with you. But a few weeks later, I started to understand what he meant. The first week went by fine. I worked at a small bookstore downtown, came home tired, and barely noticed my surroundings. The apartment was quiet, a little cold, but nothing out of the ordinary. If there were noises, I told myself they were just pipes or old floorboards settling. By the second week, I started noticing little things that didn't make sense. The chair in my living room would be slightly out of place when I came home. Small objects, my keys, a photo frame, weren't where I remembered leaving them. At first, I blamed my own forgetfulness, but it kept happening. One night while reading in bed, I heard faint footsteps coming from the next unit, apartment 311. They were slow and deliberate, stopping and starting again. But Mr. Doyle had told me that 311 was empty. A few days later, I ran into my neighbor across the hall, an elderly woman named Marcy. When I mentioned the noises, her expression changed immediately. She said, "If you ever hear something from next door, don't respond. Just ignore it." Her tone wasn't joking. She sounded afraid. I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded and went back inside. By the third week, things got worse. Every night around midnight, the air inside my apartment would turn freezing cold, even though the heater was running. Sometimes I'd wake up feeling like someone was standing near my bed, watching me. And once, late at night, I could have sworn I heard a woman crying softly, coming from inside my closet. The sound was faint, but clear. She was whispering, repeating a name over and over, like she was pleading for someone. I didn't understand what she was saying, and I didn't dare check. I just pulled the blanket over my head and waited for morning. The next day, I forced myself to open the closet. Everything looked normal at first, but then I noticed the back wall. The bricks had a crack running through the plaster, as if something had once been sealed there. From that crack came a faint, foul smell, like wet earth and decay. I shut the door immediately. That afternoon, I called Mr. Doyle and asked him to come take a look. He showed up with his usual calm expression, but when he saw the wall inside the closet, he went pale. He said he'd have a handyman come by to patch it up. When I asked what was wrong with that section of the wall, he hesitated for a long time before answering quietly. The tenant next door, Daniel, he lived in 311. He disappeared 3 years ago. The police never found him. But a few people after that said they could still hear him, or something that sounded like him. Then he left without another word. By the fourth week, I was barely sleeping there. Every time I came home from work, the apartment felt colder, heavier, like it didn't want me there. Sometimes I caught a glimpse of movement in the corner of a mirror, but when I turned around, nothing was there. And every night, the same feeling of being watched. The night before I moved out was the worst. It was around 1 in the morning. I was sitting on the edge of my bed, trying to calm myself enough to sleep, Then the temperature dropped again. I could hear faint breathing coming from inside the closet, followed by a whisper, calm and almost sorrowful. "You're not Daniel." I didn't even grab my bag. I just left, ran down the stairs, got in my car, and drove straight to a motel. I never went back. 2 weeks later, I returned only to pick up my things. But apartment 312 was locked from the outside. Mr. Doyle wouldn't answer my calls. Marcy, the woman across the hall, just shook her head and said, "They've closed off the top floor for renovations. But I don't think they'll ever open it again." A few months after that, I saw a local news article online. Maple Street Apartments had burned down in the middle of the night. The fire started in Unit 311. No one was hurt, but firefighters found something inside the wall between 311 and 312. A bundle of human bones wrapped in plastic and a small, half-burned note that said only 2 words. "I'm sorry." My name is Sandra. I moved into my new apartment in May, about 2 years ago. It was on the edge of a small town in Mansfield, Ohio, quiet, surrounded by old maple trees and narrow streets. I'd just switched jobs and gone through a breakup with my fiancée, so all I wanted was peace and distance from everything. The building was old but still in decent shape. I rented a small second-floor unit. A young couple with a baby lived below me, and above my ceiling there was only one more apartment, Unit 3B. When I moved in, the landlord, Mr. Smith, told me that the top-floor unit was empty. At first, everything was fine. The place felt calm, the rent was cheap, and the evening sunlight poured through the living room window. For 2 full weeks, it actually felt like a fresh start. Then, during the 3rd week, I started hearing footsteps from above me. Slow, heavy steps that moved back and forth late at night. When I asked Mr. Smith about it, he said, "Nobody's living up there. Maybe one of the contractors came by after hours, but these weren't the sounds of tools or work. It sounded like someone pacing restlessly in the dark." One night around 1 a.m., I heard what sounded like furniture being dragged directly above my head. It went on for several minutes, back and forth, scraping, pausing, then starting again. The next morning, I decided to go upstairs. The hallway on the 3rd floor was dim, one of the lights flickering. The door to 3B was shut tight, but I could see cigarette ash on the floor and fresh shoe prints in the dust near the threshold. It looked like someone had been there recently. I knocked once. There was no response, but I heard movement inside. Soft footsteps, moving away from the door. I went back downstairs, trying to convince myself I imagined it. Over the next few days, the noises continued. Footsteps, faint thuds, something falling. Whenever I went up to check, the floor above was silent. I started to wonder if someone was squatting up there, maybe hiding. On the 4th night, while I was working on my laptop, I heard another sound, something heavier this time. I looked up, and through the small air vent in the ceiling came the faint sound of a woman's voice, whispering. He didn't leave. The voice was soft, fragile, like someone talking to herself. I froze. It wasn't coming from the TV or my phone. It was coming from inside the vent. I stayed still for what felt like an hour before I finally turned off the light and waited for morning. The next day, I went straight to Mr. Smith and told him someone had to be staying in that unit. He frowned, shook his head, and said, "There's nobody in 3B. I still have the only key." Then he pulled a new key from his pocket, still sealed in its original plastic. That didn't make me feel better. If he wasn't lying, then who had I heard? By the 4th week, the situation had gotten unbearable. Almost every night between 11 p.m. and 2 a.m., the footsteps returned, sometimes running, sometimes stopping right above where I slept. I I could even hear water running through the pipes, as if someone upstairs was taking a shower. But 3B was supposed to be empty. The worst night came near the end of the month. I had just finished working when the power went out. The apartment went completely dark. Then, above me, something heavy scraped across the floor again. I turned on my phone flashlight and stared at the ceiling. That's when I heard it. A low, quiet laugh. A woman's laugh. Cold, distant, wrong. A moment later, something dripped from the vent. Thick, dark liquid hit the kitchen floor, drop after drop. When I shone the light on it, the color wasn't water. It was dark red. I grabbed my keys and ran out. The next morning, I came back with Mr. Smith. He looked confused and a little uneasy. When he opened the door to 3B, the smell hit us instantly. Rot, mold, and something metallic underneath. The apartment was completely empty. No furniture, no boxes, no sign anyone had been there for years. But on the kitchen floor there was a large dark stain, dried and uneven, spreading from the center of the room. No one could explain it. The police came later. They said it was probably a pipe leak mixed with rust from the old vents. But I knew that laugh hadn't come from a pipe. A week later, I moved out. I didn't even finish the month. A few months after that, I got a message from my old neighbor from a previous apartment, Mrs. Angel. I never told her I had moved to Mansfield, so I don't know how she found out. Her message only said one thing. I told you before, if you ever hear something from above, don't answer. My name is Kaguchi Sato. I'm from Japan. 3 years ago, my company sent me to the United States for a 1-month work assignment. It was in a small, quiet town in northern Illinois, the kind of place where the streets are lined with bare trees and everyone seems to know each other. The company arranged a place for me to stay, an old apartment building on Willow Avenue. It was about a 10-minute walk from the office. The building looked old, maybe built in the 1950s, with faded green paint and wooden window frames that had started to rot. A metal sign by the entrance read, "Willow Apartments, since 1954. I arrived on a cold Sunday afternoon in November. The air was damp, and a thin drizzle had been falling since morning. An elderly man named Mr. Howard, the building manager, greeted me when I arrived. He was polite, a little hard to understand with his fast accent, but kind enough. "Apartment 2C, Mr. Kaguchi. You'll have it all to yourself." The unit was at the end of the second-floor hallway. When I opened the door, the air inside smelled faintly of old wood and moisture. The wallpaper was peeling, and the floor creaked when I walked across it. Still, it was decent. All I needed was a place to sleep and work for a few weeks. For the first week, everything was fine. I worked long hours, came home late, ate simple meals, and went to bed early. Sometimes I heard muffled voices from the neighboring unit. 2B, I think. It sounded like a woman speaking softly, maybe on the phone. I never met her, but I often heard light footsteps in the hallway at night. During the second week, things started to feel off. Every night, around 12:30 a.m., I heard footsteps above my ceiling. Slow, steady, pacing back and forth. I assumed someone lived upstairs, but when I asked Mr. Howard the next day, he frowned. "There's nobody upstairs, son. Third floor's been closed for years. Plumbing and wiring issues, I remember feeling confused." That night, the footsteps came back, heavier this time, moving faster, like someone was restless or angry. I muted the TV, staring at the ceiling. Then, from the air vent in the corner of my room, I heard something dragging slowly, like cloth or rope being pulled. The sound stopped after a few seconds. I didn't sleep that night. 3 days later, when I opened my door to go to work, I noticed something on the floor, A woman's sandal, right in front of my apartment door. Just one, the right side. It wasn't mine, obviously, and it looked old and worn. I placed it beside the hallway wall, assuming someone had dropped it. But the next morning, it was back in front of my door again, facing inward, toward my apartment. That night, while watching TV, I heard a faint laugh, a woman's laugh, soft and almost playful. It came from somewhere behind my sofa. I turned around immediately. No one was there. The lamp light flickered slightly, and the air in the room suddenly felt colder. A few nights later, the footsteps returned. This time, they were running above me, fast, uneven, stopping right above my bed. Then silence. A few seconds later, something heavy hit the floor, followed by a dull rolling sound. The next morning, I finally decided to go upstairs. The third floor was dark. The lights didn't work, and the air smelled thick and damp. Dust covered everything. But near the far end of the hall, outside a door marked 3C, I saw small footprints in the dust, leading toward the door, but not away from it. I knocked once, no response. I knocked again, still silence. When I looked down, I noticed a single sandal lying by the door, the left one, the match to the one I'd found earlier. I walked downstairs quickly. Mr. Howard was standing by the office, looking at me with concern. "You went upstairs, didn't you?" he asked quietly. I nodded. He sighed. "I told you not to." "That floor's been closed for a reason." I asked what he meant. He hesitated, then said, "There was a tenant up there once, a woman. She disappeared. They never found her." I looked down at the sandal still in my hand. He noticed it, and his expression changed. Then, almost whispering, he said, "Keep it, son. Sometimes they come back for what they left behind." That night, I locked every door and window. I sat awake in bed, listening. For a while, nothing happened. Then, around 2 a.m., I heard 3 soft knocks on my front door. Even gentle, deliberate. I didn't move. Then a woman's voice, calm, quiet, and close, spoke from the other side. "Sumimasen, my sandal." My blood turned cold. The voice was polite, almost formal, but it came from just inches away from the door. I stared at the narrow gap under it and saw 2 small bare feet casting shadows. I backed away slowly and turned off every light. When I looked again, the feet were gone. The next morning, the sandal was gone too, but on the floor, just outside my door, were 2 wet footprints, side by side, facing the stairs, as if someone had been standing there after coming in from the rain. The prints stopped halfway down the hallway. I never heard the footsteps again. When my final week came, I packed my things and left the apartment key on the table. Before leaving, I wrote a short note for Mr. Howard. "Thank you for your help. Please tell her I didn't take it. I caught an early bus out of town and never looked back. Even now, years later, whenever I hear footsteps above me in the middle of the night, I can't help but stop and listen